All right, we're live in three, two, and welcome everybody to another episode of the Planetmullins podcast. And I'm absolutely thrilled today to have probably the most famous rock and roll photographer in history as my guest. I'm getting goosebumps just seeing his face and knowing I have the opportunity to ask him this mountain of questions I have. This is Jimmy Steinfeldt, ladies and gentlemen. Hi, Jimmy.
Hi, everybody. Rob in particular. How are you?
I'm doing well, man. I when I was doing my show prep for this, and I saw the photos that you sent me, just examples, of things in the emails. I was just kind of with my jaw on the floor because it's Prince and it's Michael Jackson and it's Madonna and it's Bob Dylan and it's frickin' everybody big, man. So I know you've got a new book coming out. We're going to talk about the book today, and I'm thrilled that you can be on the show. So here's my first question. And my first question is, because I know that you went to my sister's school, San Diego State,
Yes.
and you studied for a business degree.
Yes.
And then how do you go from a business degree at San Diego State and then all of a sudden you're getting these backstage passes to these big rock concerts and you're allowed to take pictures? I mean, how do you pull that off? I think people will be interested in hearing, like, how did you do that?
Well, I'm going to give you and your viewers a free view into my book because my book, Rock and Roll Lens, answers that question you just had in great detail. But in a nutshell, what happened is when I finished college at San Diego State, I wanted to travel around the United States. I hadn't seen most of the country growing up. I hadn't done that much traveling. And
Okay.
I decided I'm done with college. I want to see the country, but I want to have memories of this trip someday. So I better get a camera. So a buddy of mine in college was a fine photographer, and we went together to the store and we looked at some expensive cameras, which I couldn't afford. And we also looked at this camera right here. This is my first camera, $100.
$100 for a Minolta.
For a Minolta. And many of the pictures that you see in my book were taken with that $100 camera. But after I finished my travels, whereby I used the camera to record landscapes and famous places in America, when I got those pictures back from the lab, I saw they were pretty good. And I'd never done photography before.
Okay.
So it was a validation that somehow or another I had an ability to take photographs. Then, because I've always loved music, I started bringing my camera to concerts. And this is years ago when you really didn't need any permission. People brought cameras to concerts, and it got more strict years later. You had to get permission and so forth.
Right.
But those early pictures that I took, one in particular of Stevie Nicks is in Rock and Roll Lens. When I saw that picture, I thought, oh my gosh, I'm pretty good at shooting concerts, which are not easy to shoot, but somehow I figured it out. And then it became almost like an addiction. It was fun. I could go to the shows. I could feel like I was part of the show in a little way. And then I would, after photographing a lot of concerts, people in the music industry kept seeing me show up at shows. And eventually people in the industry started to hire me for small jobs.
Okay.
And then it sort of snowballed from there.
Okay. So because, it's interesting that you say how different it is in today's world, because people can be thrown out for shooting a picture or they can be celebrated for shooting a picture. But in those days, initially you would do these things, and then were you trying to get backstage, or did you have to wait until you'd reached a certain apex in your work to where finally the artists were like, hey, let's get Jimmy back here, into the green room to hang out with ZZ Top or Miles Davis or whoever?
That I was able to get backstage pretty quickly in my career. First off, the security was much more friendly, let's say, at that time.
Okay.
And a lot of the artists didn't feel that intimidated about having a photographer backstage. And I also knew a lot of people locally. I knew promoters, and I knew people that worked for the record companies, and they were happy to just have someone come back, not all the time, but frequently to take pictures. And also, I'm not a pushy type of person. So if I was backstage and it appeared that people didn't want their pictures taken, I would just hang out.
Yeah, cool. Well, the thing that I've noticed in being kind of on both sides of the concert thing, being, an artist and performing, and then also being a person who attends and is, out in the audience, sometimes things can get kind of harrowing and kind of difficult and crazy. I remember one time when we were playing at Barfly on Sunset, which was a celebrity jam, where you actually shot a picture of me that I saw years later.
Oh, great. That's funny.
I don't think I made your book, but I remember seeing it online and going, wow, man, that's cool. Who's this Jimmy Steinfeldt guy? And then I looked into it. But sometimes you end up in difficult situations. We had celebrity guests come up that would tantrum and sometimes throw things, and then we couldn't get them off the stage. One guy came up and he was singing knock knock knocking on heaven's door, and he was so blasted that me and the bass player were just counting, okay, we've done that 8 bars 24 times, now 25, now 26. Like, what is, does anything stand out in particular as the most insane situation or the most dangerous where you were trying to get your work done?
I would say the most challenging would be where there'd be, the kind of dancing in the mosh pit when mosh pits became popular.
Wow.
Or the hard rock shows. And I'm in the center of it with a camera trying to take a picture and being bounced all over the place and occasionally elbowed. I mean, it could be very dangerous. So I would say, and that happened many times. So that would probably be the most physically dangerous situation, shooting some of those more wild and crazy concerts where you basically were in the middle of a wrestling match.
Wow.
But to get some of the best pictures, I mean, that's where especially if one of the guys in the band would jump off the stage into the crowd.
Right.
That, of course, was popular in that type of music. And then they would be, moved along atop people's heads. Those would be great pictures, but you had to do it in peril.
Right.
I was in great peril during those moments.
Well, that's amazing that you're able to just even survive all of that stuff and to even survive the rock and roll business in general, because there's so much insanity that's associated with it. And you seem like you're very level-headed, but you probably have to be pretty nimble too, to just kind of, go with the flow and get to the side of the stage before somebody jumps on the top of you. Right. And being sure to keep the mud and the mosh and all the stuff off of your lens, right?
Absolutely. And it's interesting you mentioned mud. One of the craziest shows I ever photographed was a festival outdoors in Wisconsin, and it rained before the concert, it rained during the concert. So it was just mud everywhere, and we nicknamed it Mud Fest. and the young crowd of energetic concert goers decided it would be great fun to just make mud balls and throw them at the stage.
Oh my God.
So they ruined a lot of people's equipment. One of the bands, who I think came from Europe, refused to play because they were, I think, an electronica band.
Okay.
And they had all their electronic, gear, like what's behind you. And it's one thing to clean off a guitar, even an electric guitar.
Right.
Pelted, but to it'd be almost impossible. They would have ruined that gear. So yes, Mudfest. I got some very good pictures. Fortunately, I was in the crowd, so the mud was going towards the stage.
Right.
But I think my camera got a little dirty, at least that day. There you go. A hazard.
The hazards of that kind of stuff are crazy. And then, but obviously, you've managed to have a fantastic career, and your style and your personality as a person, I'm sure, opened a lot of these doors, because it's just a who's who of everybody big and all kinds of music. And when I saw that you had taken pictures of Miles Davis, being mostly a jazz guy, that's one of the first stories. I mean, obviously we're not going to get through all the stuff in your brand new fabulous book, which is going to be coming out on the 19th of June with a big party in Marina Del Rey, and we'll talk about that. But how did you photograph Miles Davis? Because he was always known as a really touchy guy that, kind of wasn't very social and friendly.
I'm going to tell you about Miles Davis because I met him a couple of times, photographed him at least 2 or 3 times. First thing I do want to point out is the book I'm going to be signing on June 19th is not a brand new book. That's actually my first book, Rock and Roll Lens, the big, beautiful hardcover coffee table book, all in color.
Nice.
Now that's been out for quite a while,
Mm-hmm.
but a wonderful woman, Evelyn, who owns Petals and Wax in Marina Del Rey, is doing this event at her amazing gift shop.
Oh.
So we decided that would be the right book to present. I have a second book that also came out a few years ago, but that's a little smaller book. It's a paperback. So the big, beautiful book will be for sale June 19th, Petals and Wax, Marina Del Rey. And when we're done with this conversation, Rob, I'm going to tell you about my third book that hopefully will be coming out in the next year or so.
Wow. Well,
We'll let that one hang out there for a minute, a little mystery.
That's fantastic. And
I just wanted your fans to know, your listeners and viewers, that that's what's going on with the book on June 19th.
Okay.
Now, Miles Davis.
Yeah.
So I photographed Miles Davis first at the Orpheum Theater in Minneapolis. A lot of my photography was done in Minneapolis because that's where I'm originally from.
Okay.
And started my photography career. And that was terrific. That was a great concert. I'd never seen him in concert before that. And
Okay.
I was very impressed. And the pictures turned out. In fact, one of those pictures from that show ended up on one of his albums. And that I'm very proud of. I think it's called Miles Davis Live. It was one of his live recordings. But I would meet him after that show backstage, and he let me take a couple pictures of him just hanging out. But then he returned to Minneapolis, in the early 90s, where he performed at Prince's club, Glam Slam.
They had one of those in LA. And
They did indeed.
Yeah.
Prince had one here in Los Angeles, and also one in Minneapolis at the same time.
Right.
I think the LA one was maybe open a short period of time. The one in Minneapolis was open for a number of years. I photographed a lot of famous people at Prince's club, Glam Slam.
Nice.
And I also photographed Prince, who would perform often at his own club. But the night Miles Davis played Glam Slam, I was able to get backstage and remind him that I had photographed him previously.
Mm-hmm.
I gifted him with a photo. He appreciated that. And I knew about his background that he could be kind of surly. So I was just very low key. And fortunately for me, there was a young rap artist, I wish I could remember his name, who was hanging out. And Miles was sort of giving him pointers on the music industry. And I thought that was terrific. He was helping a young artist. And I just sort of hung out. I took a couple pictures of them. And so that was pleasant. And of course, Miles, he had a very unique voice, as you may know.
Oh,
I
the
mean, he
gruff
talked like
Mullins.
this. Yeah, maybe he was related to Bob Dylan or Bob was related to him. I both had that gravelly voice. Now, Miles was famous or infamous for during this concert, he'd turn his back to the audience.
Right, right. I remember that being, people always talked about that.
Yeah. I don't really know the reason why. He did not do that through the whole concert. We have to be straightforward about that. But he would do that frequently. And maybe he was just playing to his drummer and the other guys, or maybe he just wanted to be inside of himself. But that was kind of a unique thing. Most performers want to look to the audience.
Yeah.
And he would frequently turn his back to the audience while he was playing. And I mentioned this years ago to my dad. And my dad said to me, I saw Miles Davis in the 50s in New York, and he was doing it back then. So this was obviously part of his stagecraft.
Wow.
The great Miles Davis. So I'm honored to have seen him a number of times, to have met him briefly. Mostly I photograph rock and roll.
Right.
That's what I grew up with. But I did figure out early in my career that I wanted to see the legendary musicians, no matter what genre they were in.
Right.
And they'd come to town, and actually it educated me a lot. For instance, I did not grow up in my house with country music, country western, however you want to call it. But I came to love country music in large part because I decided, well, I want to photograph Willie Nelson when he comes to town, and Dolly Parton and Johnny Cash. I got to work very closely with Johnny Cash and also June Carter Cash. So I'm very happy that I had some curiosity, that I wasn't going to shoot just rock and roll, even though that was most of what I shot. But I shot jazz artists. I shot Pavarotti. So I shot a little bit of classical opera, and many country artists, blues, jazz, all forms, and then hip hop when that became very popular.
Wow. Well, at this point, because I have people always asking me questions about my bucket list and things like that. And and it kind of makes them angry because I don't really have a bucket list anymore. I've kind of done everything there is to do. And now I'm just doing it again. I've worked with these great people that were like Hubert Laws was always an idol of mine when I was a kid. And then, now I play with Hubert all the time and this and that and the other thing. But did you have a specific list of people early on, or did you just kind of just wing it and say, well, there's a festival down in Nashville next week, and I see there's something up in Wisconsin, Mud Fest, so I'm just gonna. Did you drive to a lot of this early stuff, or were you flying, or what?
I mostly shot things that were local. I was lucky. Both of our professions, you got to have talent, which you certainly have, and I like to think I do too. But you have to have some lucky breaks too.
Right.
And my luck was that I was in Minneapolis when there was this Minneapolis music scene going on. There's still a scene there, but I was really there at an apex of it, most especially Prince.
Right.
Also, everybody that was associated with Prince, Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, The Time, just a long list of wonderful artists.
Morris Day and the Time.
Morris Day and the Time. And of course, everything that had to do with Purple Rain. Apollonia, the co-star of the movie, who's going to be introducing me at Petals and Wax on June 19th. She'll be there in person.
Purple Rain Apollonia is going to be at your party in Marina Del Rey on
my book signing. Yeah, I'm very excited about that.
That's going to be
wonderful, talented, beautiful actress and singer. Nice. And so Minneapolis was a good place to be. Now, not only was there sort of the Minneapolis sound going on, funk, soul, this type of music, but there was an underground music scene too. Bands like The Replacements and Husker Du, and then later Soul Asylum. So there was just a lot of, so I didn't have to go very far. That's what I'm getting at. I could just be right there.
Right.
and become acquainted with and friends with all the club owners, all the venues, the promoters, and not have to really go too far. Now, obviously, all the big national acts would come through town because Minneapolis, St. Paul is a big enough town. Every tour, Sinatra came on his tour, photographed Frank Sinatra. So pretty much everybody would come through town. Now, occasionally, somebody didn't come to town. The Who would come to town, but at one tour they did not, and I was really disappointed. I had never photographed the Who, and they played at San Diego. So that was a time where I said, I'm going to my old college town, and I flew to San Diego specifically to photograph the Who at Jack Murphy Stadium.
Wow.
And I got a picture of the Who at the encore, all of them looking right at me. And that's in the book, Rock and Roll Lens. That's one that I chose.
Mm-hmm.
So I would travel, but I didn't have to travel that much.
Yeah, with all of those great acts coming through Minneapolis, and you probably at a point you learned the venues and you knew where you could, get your best shot, and you had the access to everybody. And I mean, just the pictures that I've seen of yours so far are outstanding. And I love the idea that you've got a hardbound, old school coffee table book where people can come, over. Like if you purchase this book, you've always got a conversation starter because Jimmy's set that all up for you guys. So you can flip probably to any page or any artist and see the stories, look at the incredible photos. And, speaking of your photos being incredible, because you obviously have a really strong talent for it and you developed that over the years and everything, but your instincts are just so good. My dad was a newspaper photographer.
Oh, that's incredible.
And he worked for the Ontario Daily Report and then later on for the LA Times, but he's switched over to copy editing and stuff. But we had a dark room. Our whole garage was a dark room through my childhood, and I wanted it to be a drum practice room and a garage pit. And he had all of these funny smelling chemicals and like pots of things and like hangers with these, weird crime scenes hanging in the garage and stuff. And he'd be like, oh, look at this car wreck, But your style is so distinctive. Do you have influences that you just kind of absorbed into your own thing? Because in music we have that. Obviously, Chick Corea was an influence on me, and Hubert Laws and lots of other people, especially the Doors. And when jazz people hear that, the first album I ever bought was the Doors, they're like, oh, that can't be right because you're a jazz guy. But I started out listening to the Doors on the radio when I was a kid. So do you have some particular technique or type of film that you use, or different filters, or something that you've created your own thing with? Or how does all that work?
I have early on, almost at the very beginning, coinciding with the start of my career, Kodak came out with a high-speed film that allowed you to photograph in low light, which is, you go to a concert, it's basically low light except for the spotlight.
Okay.
And the entertainment. And so I tried that film. They had just come out with it. It worked perfect. So a tremendous amount of my well-known photographs were shot with that film. And a lot of other photographers were using slide film, which is good too. But because I used that particular special film a lot, I think that did give me a certain look, certainly to my concert photography.
Okay.
In the studio, which I ended up doing a lot of studio photography for album covers and everything, I would use slide film mainly because the grain was really tight and therefore you could blow it up large and you wouldn't see grain.
Oh,
Also, I shot a lot of black and white in the studio.
I
And one
see.
of my favorite black and white films was Infrared. And that went totally the opposite way. It gave you grain, and it looked very painterly. It had sort of an impressionist type
Right,
in black and white. So I
right.
used some of these things also I used a lot of different films that looked awful. So, you learn by trial and error. And so I guess I do have some. Now, there are a couple of photographers who greatly influenced me, mostly regarding studio photography. Richard Avedon being the most influential to me. I talk about him a little bit in my book. Also, a cinematographer
Wow.
by the name of Carl Freund, who was one of the great cinematographers of the old days, including all the way back to silent movies.
Wow.
And then as far as concert photography, you've got the great Henry Diltz, who you might know. Henry was located mostly here in Laurel Canyon in Los Angeles, and he shot the music scene in the 60s and 70s. And he's a friend. I've interviewed him, like you're
Wow.
interviewing me.
How
I've
cool.
interviewed him. I recently interviewed another fine photographer named Aaron Rappaport. I always loved his work. Jim Marshall, of course, one of the great photographers from the 60s. So I have a lot of influences in the photography world.
But you didn't take, you were a business major, so it wasn't like you were in photography class.
That's true. I
You're,
am, generally speaking, a self-taught photographer. A couple friends of mine did help me a lot in the early days of my studio photography, because that was a whole different departure for me. You have to learn lighting.
uh,
And my friends helped me learn the lighting. So then I just took it from there and created my own style.
incredible, man. It's just incredible. I'm so happy to hear all these inside things that you got going on. Now, one of the things that I noticed in just looking through all the material and stuff is that you've got your stuff over at Getty Images. And
Yeah.
early on there, I don't remember pre-internet there being a Getty Images, but I don't know enough about photography to know if there already was one before the online world came to be or whatever. But how does it if I were a young photographer trying to start out and I go, man, Jimmy Steinfeldt is the bomb. He's done everything. He's all over Getty Images. How the heck do I get my photos on Getty Images? And do they pay for that? And how does that work? Can you just kind of run that down a little bit or talk about it a bit?
Sure. I can tell you how it came to pass that I got into Getty Images. Kind of an interesting story. I'll make it as brief as I can.
Cool.
When I first moved here to Los Angeles, there was a wonderful art exhibit at Bergamot Station.
I know
and
where
they
that
had, and that's in Santa Monica.
right.
And it was the history of the album cover.
Wow.
So I thought, well, this is perfect. This is great. I got to check. So I went there, and some of the legendary photographers from the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, gentlemen in their 60s, 70s, and 80s were there. I got to meet a few of them, but also there was a man named Michael Oakes, and he had his own agency called the Michael Oakes Agency Archives, the Michael Oakes Archives.
Okay.
And I knew that name because I'd been reading Rolling Stone my whole life.
Okay.
And many pictures that you would see underneath, it would say Michael Oakes Archives. So I introduced myself to him, told him, I've been looking at your pictures my whole life.
Wow.
And I'm a photographer. And he said, well, our archive go back to the 1920s. He had collected stuff from earlier times. He wasn't doing photography in the 1920s. But anyway, he had this huge collection. And he said, but we don't have that many pictures from the 80s and the 90s. This was 1996.
Okay.
And he said, you should come and bring some stuff. Maybe we can work together.
Wow.
Yeah. So I brought my stuff to his offices and he signed me up. And then he helped me get my photographs. He would license my photographs to magazines all around the world.
Mhm.
And my name would appear and then / Michael Oakes Archives. And then a few years later, he basically retired. He sold his amazing business to Getty. And so I automatically ended up at Getty. I would say it's probably very difficult for a young photographer to get into Getty at this time.
Right.
They represent so many photographers, but I would also say, don't let anything stop you. If you're a young, energetic photographer, contact their offices, read about them on the internet, try and figure out how to get your images to Getty or any agency. They're the biggest, but I believe there are others. Listen, when I started my career, I would go to the magazine rack in town, all the magazine stores, and I would purchase all the music magazines.
Right.
And then I would telephone, which you could do in those days, and a human would answer the phone. Or I would, well, they didn't have email, that you could fax them. Anyway, I would reach out to magazines on my own initiative. And I'd say, look, you don't know me. I don't really know you, but I'm here in Minneapolis. I'm photographing important music people. How can I contribute to your magazine? That's how I started. That's how I got into Spin magazine. Spin had just come out. It was a brand new magazine competing with Rolling Stone. And that was the first national magazine that I got into. That helped me get into Rolling Stone later.
I see. So, the recurring theme that I'm hearing is that you're very self-motivated and you're pretty much what they call the sorry for the old school terminology, but a go-getter type person. And I've always been that way too. I mean, back in the old days, we'd get a delay flying from LA to Tokyo. We'd be on the tarmac for hours, and I would go through an entire 727 and introduce myself to every person on the plane.
Wow, that is a go-getter. That's cool.
And I would say I would be playing at Roppongi Crossing in Tokyo on June 9th through the 12th, and I really want you to come. And, those kinds of things, I think people that are more just, what do they call that type A personality when you're out there hustling or whatever, but your approach is like very aggressive and organized, but also super low key at the same time, because, like you said, if you were with some big artist backstage and you could feel the vibe that they didn't want anything going on, you would just, let it be that way. And a lot of people that get around celebrities, and you and I have probably both seen this, I get so starstruck and so crazy that they cause a scene, and then things go bad.
We've all seen that happen.
That kind of stuff. Well, I mean, now that after you got doing stuff for Rolling Stone, would they actually put you on what they call on assignment? Would they say, okay, Jimmy, we've got, Bob Dylan's going to be coming through, New York City, he's doing Madison Square Garden. Can you go shoot the pictures? How does the on assignment thing work?
Well, it would depend from magazine to magazine. Now with Spin, I was very close. I was on their original Spin Patrol. That was the name of we had a press card that said Spin Patrol.
Okay.
And there were photographers all across the nation who would photograph basically what was happening in their community. In my case, the Twin Cities. We had photographers in Seattle and Atlanta, and obviously New York, where Spin was located. So for Spin, I was very, very close with that publication. Rolling Stone, I don't recall an assignment, but I got pretty close with their photo editors, and I had many, many photos that ran in Rolling Stone.
Including Madonna.
Well, that was my very first picture in Rolling Stone.
Oh,
That
wow.
was
The first
really
one. Well, that's a good way to
exciting.
start off.
And then when Bob Dylan went on tour with Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers and the Grateful Dead, they did a huge concert in the Twin Cities, and I photographed that concert. And that picture's in the book. And that picture ended up in Rolling Stone. And my pictures of ZZ Top were in Rolling Stone, and Prince, of course, my pictures of Prince. So I do have a very special place in my heart for Rolling Stone. And of course, a lot of now lately, I would say my pictures in Rolling Stone end up, I don't have to work that hard because they get there frequently through Getty, who's
Oh, okay.
out there pitching for me. Can
Mhm.
I tell you about this book I'm working on? I think some of your listeners might be interested.
Whatever you'd like, man. The floor is yours.
Well, I'll bet some of your viewers are in the film and TV business. Would that be a correct
Absolutely
guess?
true. Absolutely true.
So my favorite movie director is Alfred Hitchcock.
Nice.
Now, he's many people's favorite director, but I really love his movies. So about, 3 years ago, I started to interview, again, like you're interviewing me today. I started interviewing legendary movie directors
Whoa.
on how they were influenced by Alfred Hitchcock.
Wow.
And I would say the book is getting close to about half done. And I have now interviewed, oh my gosh, well over a dozen of the great directors, including Peter Bogdanovich,
Whoa.
Mel Brooks, Norman Lloyd, who worked for Hitchcock, who just passed away at 106 years old. God bless his soul. John Woo, the great director John Woo, Roger Corman, Mark Rydell, and all manner of other great film directors.
Huge names.
Yeah, asking them various questions about the influence of Hitchcock on filmmaking and on them directly. And it's been a great experience. And the book is called Hitchcock's Shadow: Conversations with the Great Directors.
Wow.
So if anyone in your audience knows of a director who might want me to interview them for my book about Hitchcock, I'd be honored to interview them.
Okay, well, I'll definitely put that in the show notes once this
Good.
goes live on YouTube. I'll mention that. And man, Mel Brooks, out of that whole list, you know, he's probably my favorite guy. And the thing that just has always made him my favorite guy is I love comedy.
Mm-hmm.
And last year during the pandemic, I think everyone was watching a lot of movies, and I watched Hitchcock's The Birds again after not seeing it for a really long time.
Sure.
And it was, and the woman is going up the stairs to that bedroom door, and you're just like, lady, you don't want to go open up the door, right? And boom, it was so well staged and so beautifully shot. And I share your passion for the Hitchcock stuff, but I think probably because the music industry is just so insanely weird and hard most of the time. I really love comedy. And what was it like talking to Mel Brooks? Did you go to his house and talk to him, or do it over the internet, or how did that work?
I've interviewed Mel Brooks twice.
Okay.
Recently for the Hitchcock book, and that was either over the phone or through correspondence.
Okay.
I was not able to meet with him in person this time. The really fun time that I met with Mel Brooks was at 20th Century Fox. Several years ago, Fox launched I think the 40th anniversary of Young Frankenstein, or Frankenstein. And they dedicated a street on the lot to Mel Brooks. And they had a Mel Brooks day. And I was one of the members of the press who got to photograph him and interview him.
Wow.
And he was terrific, but I'm really proud of this. I made Mel Brooks laugh.
No way.
Yeah. I'm trying I know what. So during our interview, I asked him about Get Smart, the show that he created with Buck Henry. I
Right.
asked him, of course, about Young Frankenstein, since that's what the event was about.
Right.
But then I said, Mr. Brooks, I love the history of vaudeville. And his eyes lit up because, he was after vaudeville, but he was influenced by that era of comedy.
Sure.
And I asked him if he ever heard of an old time comic named Willie Howard. And he said, well, yes, of course. But he said, I never met him. I said, no, I understand. I said, but I had his records in our attic because my grandfather liked him. And I said, can I do a little Willie Howard? And he said, sure. So I did some of this 1920s comedy shtick for Mel Brooks, and he was laughing. So I made Mel Brooks laugh. Anyway, he was terrific. He posed for a picture with me. I did a beautiful photograph of him on the lot, and that ran with the article. So, we all bow down to the great Mel Brooks. He's simply probably the greatest director of comedy that there's ever been.
Yeah. I have just absolutely been delighted with his work my whole life. And I can't remember the name of the film, but the scene that just pops whenever I hear Mel's name. It's when he's Moses and he's coming down from the top of the mountain.
The 15 Commandments.
He's got the 2 tablets and he drops one of them. It says, I now present these 10 commandments, and he drops the tablet and it breaks. That's just one of my favorite moments about him. And so your Hitchcock book really sounds interesting, though, especially for people that are into the more darker side. Now you're going to be completing that. Do you set deadlines for yourself? Because I guess when you're working on your own, and mostly on your own, a lot of writers and comics and photographers are pretty much by themselves a lot.
Right.
So, do you have to set deadlines? Like, what motivates you to get up and do whatever you need to do every day?
Well, certainly regarding my photography career, which is most of what I do, I'm self-contained, so I can set my own schedule.
Okay.
And so that's taken care of. This book I'm working on, I'm totally, at the mercy, if you will, of these legendary directors that I reach out to. And so there's no deadline on the Hitchcock book, and I have no idea when it's going to be done. But it's been a great, fun experience meeting with many of these directors. But on my 2 books on photography, I did set a deadline for each one that helped me get it completed.
Okay.
Deadlines are important. And with the pandemic, one of the things I've been doing a lot, because certainly assignments have been far less during the pandemic, I've been going through my decades-old archive of photographs and digitizing the pictures I took on film.
Okay.
And I've been doing that now for a year. Mm-hmm. Every day I take a stack of photos and I have to edit them. I got to go through them and figure out, these ones qualify for taking the extra time to scan. These ones don't. Okay. And then I have to label everyone, when I took it, where I took it, who's in it, and then submit it to my agent for licensing. So that's been a big project. And I just try to do a little bit each day. Did you know that I also write songs?
No, I didn't know anything about that side of you, but my curiosity was piqued about you possibly being a musician, because I know a lot of critics and people that are kind of ancillary yet integral parts of the business are musicians that are just doing another facet of it, like the incredible jazz writer Scott Yanow, who has written 9 books and has the largest LP jazz collection I've ever seen. It's like 40,000 12-inch LPs, and they're all cataloged and organized, and he knows everything about it. He's a saxophone player, but his main thing is being the writer. And then he has a birthday party every year where he has a jam. So are you a guitar? I'm going to just go out on a limb and say you probably play guitar.
That is true.
Okay.
Virtually every song I've written, I wrote on guitar.
Okay.
Also, most of the songs I've written, I wrote with a co-writer. I need that, somebody to bounce things off of.
Sure.
That's one of the reasons I admire a guy like Dylan so much, how he's able to do it, or Springsteen, or any of these solo artists, just amazing to me. But then again, having a partner worked out pretty good for Lennon and McCartney,
right?
And, Jagger and Richards. I mean, everybody's different. I need someone to co-write with, and I write the songs on guitar.
Okay.
I think I'm a pretty good guitar player. I play rhythm guitar generally, and I can play some lead. And recently I did write a song on piano, but you wouldn't want to have me do a piano recital.
I want to come up to Elusive Studios to see that.
I'd love to have you.
Hey, now the whole thing about Elusive Studios, is that a name that you came up with just for your studio? Like I've had a couple, the one that I've had, the name I've used the most was based on a club owner criticizing the band in New Mexico many years ago, because he sent up this note to the stage. And during the first set, we were in this little teeny place in Albuquerque, and he sent up this note. He said, "Dear Rob, much too loud, painful. Turn it down. P.S. You guys sound great." So I've had the studio much too loud.
That's great. I love that. Well, I'll tell you how the name came about.
Yes, please.
I think it came about for, I think, the same reason that a number of music industry people have come up with names. Okay. Maybe you've heard of Lookout Management, a famous management company. And I think that's because they were located on or near Lookout Mountain in Los Angeles.
Okay.
Or Lookout, it's also a street. Well, that's Elusive is the name of the street I'm located on.
Oh, you live on Elusive
Drive. So
you're actually, it's literal and figurative.
That is absolutely true. It's literal and figurative. Elusive Drive is near Mannix Drive. And I've always thought that show, maybe the creator, which I think was Bruce Geller, maybe he lived on Mannix Drive in the Hollywood Hills.
Oh. I
don't know where he came up with the name Mannix. So I do think a lot of people in entertainment come up with their company names based on maybe this, if they have a neat sounding street.
Right. Well,
but you'll come and visit sometime.
I would love to anytime. Let's just play like a little lightning round with some of these big names, and you can give me just one sentence or two.
Sure.
Okay, Elvis Costello.
Oh, I have a great story about Elvis in my book. I'll say it. First off, I'm a huge fan. Oh, and this is really fun. So one day I photographed Elvis at least 2, maybe 3 times. One of the times I photographed him, I took to the concert a date, wonderful girl, and we were backstage, and I said, "Elvis, I want you to meet my girlfriend, Allison." And so that, of course, was a great icebreaker. So that was memorable and funny, and we all laughed about that. That was really her name. And then years later, I was at, I think, a Bob Dylan concert, and Elvis was in the audience, and there was a intermission.
Okay.
And 100 guys get up out of their seat and go to the restroom, and there's a line. You know where it was? It was at on Hollywood Boulevard. It was at the Pantages.
Oh, Pantages, yeah.
So there's 100 people in line in the lobby to use the men's room, and I couldn't believe it. Standing next to me in line is Elvis Costello. Like, he can't go backstage. He doesn't know anybody. So I said, "Elvis, I'm going next door to the Frolic Room. That's a little bar there on Hollywood Boulevard. And don't stand in this line. So he kept standing in the line. I left, ran into the Frolic Room, used the bathroom, came back out, and now Elvis was maybe only the 80th person in line. And I just waved. I don't know, he might have thought I was being weird. I don't know. I was trying to be friendly. Anyway, so that's a goofy story. I have what I think is a wonderful picture of Elvis in my
so great. It's so great. I mean, it's just it's amazing. It's funny too, because you said, you took your girlfriend up to meet him, and for a lot of the younger guys out there, if you get a chance to do something like that, it's a good, hedge your bets, because there's a lot of times where your girlfriend will just say, well, thank you for introducing me to Elvis Costello. Bye-bye.
Well, okay. That did happen once. I took, the girl wasn't a girlfriend. She was a beautiful model because I do fashion photography too.
Oh, okay.
So I took one of the models I used to photograph to an Eric Clapton concert.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. So if you want to read the whole story, buy my book. It's in the book I'm going to be signing at Petals and Wax. Look, let me mention, I want to hear some more of your questions, but let's make sure that we cover one last time this little event that's going on.
June 19th.
June 19th.
Marina Del Rey.
Petals and Wax, Marina Del Rey. I'll be signing my book, Rock and Roll Lens. There'll be refreshments supplied by Petals and Wax.
No cover.
I'm going to be introduced by Apollonia, which is just amazing. I'm so thankful that she agreed to do that. And check this out. I'm going to be bringing my Leica camera with me.
Nice.
Everyone who buys a book, I'm going to take a photograph of them and I'll email it to them, and they can use it on their social media as their headshot.
Wow.
It'll be a formal session, but I'm going to take a photo of anybody who buys a book. You get a Jimmy Steinfeldt photograph.
Wow. Well, for those of you that are watching that need a headshot, it's worth it just for that, because this guy is the world's greatest photographer, and you can't really, as far as I could tell, you couldn't probably book him for an afternoon for less than like $5,000 at this stage, and maybe he's 10 or 20. So if you get a chance to go down there and buy the book, whatever that costs, it'd be well worth your time. And I'm going to be in town. That's on a Saturday.
June 19th, 2 to 4.
I'm going to ride my bike down to that.
Oh, that'd be great.
And check you out. And okay, we're going on with the lightning round, and then we're going to finish up. Okay, Curt Cobain, Nirvana.
Yes, Curt Cobain. Well, I was and still am a huge fan of Nirvana. And I did everything I could to make sure I could photograph that show. They had already become very popular, but I got permission to photograph it. And of course, since that time, I've become friends with Dave Grohl. I photographed the Foo Fighters a number of times.
Nice.
He's had an amazing career. What can I say? I mean, he really changed. He kind of changed the music industry, the rock and roll portion of it.
Completely, man. The sound and the harmony, and I'm more of a fan of just the harmonic structures, and the writing is just unbelievable. I mean, I get all the, throwing stuff and the crazy hair and the suicidal tendencies, but the music is amazing. Here's one local girl, Sheryl Crow.
Yes. Well, I'm a huge fan. And the times I've met her, she's been so pleasant and friendly. I talk about her in the book and how, pleasant she was to work with. The picture of Sheryl in my book is a tight close-up. It's just a really beautiful close-up of her in concert. And
nice.
I just think what a career she's had, and such a fine songwriter.
Well, and that leads to, I met her at the Baked Potato in North Hollywood when she was just starting to be a background singer for Michael Jackson.
Yes.
So that takes us to the next person, Michael Jackson. That's on the cover of your book, a shot of him.
That's true.
And he's grabbing his hoo-ha right there.
Yes, he's doing the old crotch grab in that picture. Look, the king of pop. I mean, one of the greatest, not the greatest entertainers that there ever was. And I'm just honored that I got to photograph him. God bless his memory.
For sure. Okay. Did you ever, the next one is Slash. And I'm just going to say, did you ever go to Slash and say, hey, man, why don't you cut your hair?
No, I never told Slash he should almost cut his hair today. Crosby, Stills, and Nash reference.
That's my reference point.
Okay. But I've gotten to know Slash reasonably well. I not only have photographed him, I've actually filmed him with the motion picture camera. He was part of a wonderful fundraising event called Peace on the Beach. It was a big event down at Santa Monica or Venice Beach around the time of the Iraq, beginning of the Iraq War. And this was to celebrate peace, actually. He played with a lot of other performers, and I filmed that.
Okay.
And of course, I photographed him with Guns N' Roses back in the 80s.
Nice.
And I photographed him when he had a big auction of his guitars and his car at a big auction event in Beverly Hills. So what a legendary guy. And of course, my being a guitar player, you know, I have extra admiration for Slash.
Absolutely. And the last one is going to be a guy that I think is our mutual friend, Stanley Behrens, the harmonica player from War.
Yes.
Stan.
Well, Stan's one of my very, very good friends. He's one of the first people I met when I moved to Los Angeles. And I've been photographing Stan for years, and we're just best of friends. Such a talented guy. He's done harmonica for endless television shows. He's been on all the great blues records. As we know, he toured with, played with Ruth Brown, right?
Yeah, I actually have, there's a video on YouTube of me and Stan in his house doing a duet with me on piano and him singing and playing the horn on Ruth Brown.
Oh, that's great. And Bo Diddley and
Willie Dixon.
Willie Dixon. Like, I mean, how many people do you and me and your audience know that played with Willie Dixon? And,
it's incredible, because the fascinating thing about music and about photography and recordings is that you're doing documentaries all the time, basically every time you shoot something. And I'm doing that every time I play at a recording session, or you know, like that video shoot we did, the Chick Corea thing yesterday. And thank God we've got the technology to keep all of this stuff rolling. And, you know, I could probably do a whole, because we didn't get into some of these other kind of more deep areas like digital copyright and protecting your work and stuff. And maybe I can have you back on the show sometime soon to get more in depth about those specific things. But man, I cannot thank you enough for sharing time out of your busy schedule to come do my little show here today. And I'm looking forward to the thing on the 19th of June, which is going to be coming up right around the corner, and checking out your book. And, you know, I might be too scared to walk up to Apollonia. I'm going to stay off to the side at first.
She's terrific. She's very friendly. Please say hi.
Yeah.
Should we give my website address?
Absolutely. Website, any of your social media, and I'll be putting all that stuff in the YouTube.
Okay. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Well, it's all very easy. Just my name.
Okay.
The website is jimmysteinfeldt.com.
Okay.
If people are confused about how to spell my last name, if you put in any spelling in your search, it'll come up. So jimmysteinfeldt.com. Also on Instagram and Facebook, Jimmy Steinfeldt. That's pretty much, I think, covers it.
So great, man. Well, the new book is I'm going to still say it's a new book, because
it's a new book signing. That's for sure.
It's going to be a new book to a lot of people, that especially I think young people who are interested in the history of music, because music is a bigger thing than just listening to the songs. It's guys like Jimmy who have spent their whole life documenting all the artists and interacting and having the stories. And it's I'm going to highly recommend to everybody to get a copy of the book. I'm going to get one, and I'll be using it to just, enjoy the whole history and the beauty of all the decades of stuff that you've done. So thanks so much for coming on, man.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you very much.
I'll look forward to seeing you soon. Take care.